Hello, my name is CHARD DENIORD. I'm the Poet Laureate of Vermont, and this is Poet Speak. Today I'd like to welcome Doug Anderson to Poet Speak. Doug grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. He served as a combat medic in the Vietnam War, and after Vietnam attended the University of Arizona, where he studied acting. He started writing poetry after he moved to Northampton, Massachusetts, and worked with the poet Jack Gilbert. Doug has written about his experience in the Vietnam War in both poetry and nonfiction. He's the author of the poetry collection, The Moon Reflected Fire, which was published in 1995, I believe. It was the winner of the very reputable prize, the Kate Tufts Discovery Award. He's also the author of Blues for Unemployed Secret Police, which was published in 2000. In 2009, he published his memoir, Keep Your Head Down, which was published by Norton, W.W. Norton. And the subtitle for that is Vietnam, the Sixties, and a Journey of Self-Discovery. His most recent book of poetry is Horse Medicine, which was published by Barrow Street Press in 2015. It has this beautiful picture of a horse running in its field here, in its fenced-in area. Doug loves horses and has taken care of them throughout much of his life. His awards include a grant from the Eric Mathieu King Fund of the Academy of American Poets, a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, and a Pushcart Prize. He is taught at the University of Connecticut, where he earned his PhD, Eastern Connecticut State University, and the William Joyner Center for the Study of War and its Social Consequences at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. So welcome to Poet Speak, Doug. It's wonderful to have you here. And I thought we could start with you reading a poem.
Great.
And then maybe talking a little bit about it and talking about your poetry in general and your experiences writing poetry and also your experiences not writing poetry.
Okay. All right. Driving down Route 9 last night, past the VA hospital, a cool and velvety night without foreboding. When I saw him form himself from the pavement, gold center line and black paving fleshing a skeleton, and then dressed in jungle utilities, he is running in a crouch with his rifle thrust in front of him across the road and into the tall grass on the other side. I slammed on the brakes just in time to miss him, sat by the road and waited till my heart slowed down, then pulled back onto the empty road as if nothing had happened, as if there'd never been a war, as if my mind made things up just to test the brakes. Coming up on Halloween, All Hallows Eve, Samhain, Dia de Muertos, the time when the walls between the living and the dead are thinnest. Believe me, it has nothing to do with Batman and candy corn. It's been a while since I've seen the dead, more common than you'd think among combat vets, and no, I'm not insane. Don't know what jogged my mind, maybe the floater that troubles my left eye, maybe a trick of light on pavement. When my mother was dying, she claimed to have spoken to people who'd been dead 30 years, as if she could see through the veil, and the rest of us could not. I restrained myself forthwith from naming mystery, to kill a live thing with the term, to deny that we become what we do, soul heavy in the later years. It hurts our knees, but we keep moving, humping a pack of the dead who won't stay quiet.
Thank you. That was a couple years ago when you wrote that, and you were just driving down the road and saw something that wasn't there and was probably a symptom of your PTSD.
More common than people would think.
Much more common than people think, and although it's been, 40 some years?
50.
50 years?
Yeah.
This is still happening occasionally, right? What did writing the poem about the experience do?
It put me in my heart. You know, I avoided dealing with the VA or with other vets for a lot of years. I simply didn't want to deal with it. And then over the last maybe 10 years, I've been getting closer and closer to that experience and looking up old Vietnam buddies and hanging at the VA a little more than usual and just kind of owning it.
Yeah. This book, which is an extremely powerful book, The Moon Reflected Fire, which is really, it's like reading the Iliad. In fact, I think you have a poem in here about the Iliad as far as the details of war and the horror of war. Took you 27 years to write?
Oh yeah.
You weren't writing it obviously all that time. And
no, I was doing other things. I was being an actor and a director. I was trying to stay sane in Tucson, Arizona. I somehow managed to graduate from college, probably because the faculty was as stoned as I was. And then I went traveling around the country doing theater, wound up in New York, wrote a play that was done off Broadway in 1980, and gradually worked my way back up to Northampton, and in the order of financial declination began to write poetry. It seemed so immediate and so wanting to be written that that's just what happened.
Was this after or before you went to the University of Connecticut?
This was before.
Okay.
I'm a late arriver at the PhD level.
So you actually almost flunked out of the University of Arizona, right?
Oh yeah.
Back in 65, 66?
Well, I graduated. When did I graduate? I graduated in 71. I kept going away and coming back and going away and coming back, going away and coming back, and somehow managed to accumulate enough credits to graduate.
But became a Marine in the interim and went to Vietnam.
I went to Vietnam in 67.
And part of 68 too, or just 67?
Overlapping into 68 through the Tet Offensive of 68.
Right. And then wrote most of these poems in the early 90s?
Most of them.
Yeah.
Most of them. It's just I put my pen on paper and they just started happening.
Yeah.
And I wrote most of this book as a single poem. And I was working with Jack Gilbert at the time, and he encouraged me to isolate the events and turn them into individual poems and and trim them and so on.
You think, is there one in there you could read for us? Bamboo Bridge or what? Or which?
Sure, I'll just read the first one.
Okay. That's the
Night Ambush.
Night Ambush, right.
Yeah. We are still, lips swollen with mosquito bites. A tree line opens out onto paddies quartered by dikes, a moon in each, and in the center the hedged island of a village floats in its own time, ribboned with smoke. Someone is cooking fish. Whispers move across water, children and old people. Anyone between is a target. It is so quiet you can hear a safety clicked off all the way on the other side. Things live in my hair. I do not bathe. I have thrown away my underwear. I have forgotten the why of everything. I sense an indifference larger than anything I know. All that will remain of us is rusting metal disappearing in vines. Above the fog that clots the hill ahead, a red tracer arcs and dims. A black snake slides off the paddy dike into the water and makes the moon shiver.
Thank you. That's a very powerful. All of these poems are extremely powerful. Do you have any idea now why it took you so long to write these poems?
I wasn't writing. I wrote a little bit in college. I wrote a short story that was published in the University of Arizona Literary Magazine, which at the time was called The Tongue. And then I didn't write again really until I took a poetry class, and then I didn't write seriously again until in New York in the 70s, and I began to write short timers. I was still working in the theater.
But there's been this great outpouring from you in the last 10, 15 years. There's this book, The Moon Reflected Fire, and then Keep Your Head Down, which was published in 2009. And Horse Medicine, your latest book, has a lot of poems from the war in it. And also, you've just written a really magnificent novel about your, it's about your experience, but it's a work of fiction. That's called, I'm not sure if you've got a title for it.
The Summer of Love.
The Summer of Love.
Which is the summer I saw heavy fighting in Vietnam, which is ironically the summer of love in this country.
Right, right. So. I can remember talking to Michael Hare, of course, who wrote Dispatch, is one of the best books I've written about
Great
Vietnam.
Book.
Maybe the best book, who couldn't actually write the book until about 1978 or 9, and so there's this kind of similar kind of waiting period. Do you feel that you were in a kind of shock during those years?
I think it takes a while to digest something. Rilke said, "Don't write about something until it's become part of your blood." Which is a pretty good way of looking at it. That you've assimilated it to the point that you can get distance, and it isn't just a nightmare to go back into.
Yeah, your recall in the new novel, as well as in Keep Your Head Down, is just amazing. I mean, as far as your recall of details, events, as if you were right there yesterday. Is that because do you think your memory is so good anyway, or because of what happened or what you experienced?
There's a Mexican proverb, "La vida es corta pero amplia." Life is short but wide. And I think during times of intense experience, the mind is collecting information at a very deep level and a very precise level. It sometimes gets clouded by memory or fear or whatever, but the stuff is there if you can contact it. And, I remember, everything, because everything was connected with survival. And I had to know what was in the contents of my Unit 1 medical bag every day. I had to check that. And, now, you've been back to Vietnam a couple times. Just once. I went back in 2000 with the Joyner Center.
And you met a lot of your former enemies there, and also a couple of poets who were Viet Cong or North Vietnamese. Yeah,
there's a goodly number of them. I spent time with Pham Thien Swat, who has passed. He's been gone a few years now. He was a really extraordinary poet, and he was sort of the traveling USO show for the PAVN along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. He would sing his poems to them at night. A remarkable guy. Nguyen Duy, Tu Ban, Lam Thi Miza, extraordinary poets. Hu Ting, and the novelist Bao Ninh.
Well, what was it like being with them? Just
It was extraordinary. I remember we went to a Chinese restaurant in Hanoi, and Hu Ting met us there, and he looked at me and he says, "We soldiers understand each other." And this is such an extraordinary Vietnamese state of mind. They went through so much over the many, many years, since the Chinese of fighting, that they somehow have developed compassion for everyone. That they don't hate Americans. This is one of the things I discovered when I went back over in 2000. That I was received very warmly. I'm sure that there's bitterness and hate somewhere, but for the most part, they opened up to us. It was very moving.
Wow. Yeah. Was this through the Joyner Center, or was
the Joyner Center for the Study of War and its Social Consequences? And I went over with a delegation, which included Bruce Weigel and Bao Ninh. And Bruce had gone back over to meet his.
We should just mention that Bruce is also a poet who was in Vietnam.
Extraordinary poet. Yeah. And Bruce had adopted a Vietnamese orphan named Hein. And we were taking her back to meet her birth mother for the first time. And the mother came in from this village way out in the country. It was deeply moving.
Wow. Yeah. Bruce says some interesting things about your poems. I'll just read a sentence and see what I'm sure you've thought about this, but might be able to respond to here. He says that you have constructed these forms with what might be called, the forms in your poems, with what might be called a lyrical narration, wherein the poems are driven not simply by a linear telling of events, but by a careful layering of consciousness as well.
Well, I think that I'm very much at home in the lyric, and that just sort of happened. This just happens to be the way I write, both in poetry and prose. And that, in a sense, that's what poetry is. It's working at several different layers at the same time. It's not merely discourse. It's not merely the relating of events, but it causes things to happen in the mind that don't happen in other forms.
Right. I wonder, are you writing anything now about the present zeitgeist, the present spirit of the age?
Which zeitgeist?
America, 2018.
You mean the America of Donald Trump and,
Yes,
and other utter terror of the future?
I mean, I'm asking just because I've just finished watching the entire series of the Ken Burns Vietnam. The 10 parts, it's probably 40 hours because each part is an hour and a half at least, and the duplicity that film portrays during the administrations of Johnson and Nixon primarily is just a horror to watch, to go back to. And I'm just wondering if, having lived through that and fought in the war, and are now living through this period where we are hearing just as many lies, if not more, than we heard from Nixon. How are you responding?
Well, Thucydides on the first page of the Peloponnesian Wars has a paragraph that says that it had been many years since there was a war, therefore it was quite easy to get young men to go to the next one. And the historical amnesia is a real problem in the country, and particularly with the educational system disintegrating and the Republican Party's attitude toward education. They do not want people to think critically, they do not want people to experience deeply, and they want to revise history. I mean, there are people that are even claiming that we won the Vietnam War. Or in particular, they're claiming it was a noble cause, after all. And of course, this is ignorant, shallow, and or propaganda. I've been in touch with a lot of younger vets, Afghanistan and Iraq vets. And
you have a poem about it?
Yeah, this is called Binge. War comes to visit me once a day. I can't get rid of him. He's grown old and hates himself. I stopped a quarter century ago, but he still drinks, sits in airport bars and watches the khaki uniforms line up at the departure gates. Desert camouflage this time, tan boots. He orders another double and snickers, little eyes set close together and too large a head like a grizzly's, opaque and dead. Flies swarm around his gore-smeared muzzle. He stinks of corpse. I let him sleep in the garage. You see, there's no way to make him leave. Go to war just once, he's always with you. At breakfast, he feels like he's got an ice pick in his head, swears off the stuff. Never again, he says, I found God. By 5, he's back in the blood glow of the bar, bumming drinks and telling lies. He's got an eye for boys and girls with wallets full of combat pay. He'll Mickey Finn them, roll them for their souls and go off giggling. I see Senator Goldmouth weaving down the bar to slap him on the back. Let freedom ring, says he, teeth twinkling from the neon at the bar. But, politicians will enact policies that kill people by the millions and go home and sleep at night. And they'll often do it for political reasons or financial reasons. They do it for the defense industry. They do it to get reelected. They manipulate the fear and hatred in their base to stay elected. And the fact that they can just do this year after year after year after year and cause millions of deaths and maimings and destruction of the environment, as in the case of Vietnam, where they're still dealing with Agent Orange. The fact that they can do this and feel nothing, that's one of the most astonishing things I've ever thought about.
Have you ever written about that?
Yeah, in bits and pieces, mostly journalistically, when I just take off the gloves and start swinging.
I think a poem, one of your poems that addresses that, your feelings. I mean, the amount of not denial, but turmoil and upsetness that you had to suppress at times, I'm sure, was overwhelming. But you have a wonderful poem called Icon. Do you know that poem in Horse Medicine?
I haven't read it in so long I forget where it is. Okay, Icon. Icon. So full of rage to look on the statue's smug serenity, I struck the Buddha with a pry bar, hard, and out of the horrible fissure rushed the dark water that had been mulling there, the bloodied blossoms of a tree whose roots crushed my heart, the faces of all we killed in that war and were killed by. And then a hand formed out of a cloud presented me with a necklace of skulls, heavy, heavy. And I was paid $1 for each death, and the money tore my pockets, pulled me under the water, and now roared into a river, and everyone I hated came floating by, and I could not help but love them.
Remember it now?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I just I don't read that one very often at readings, so I'd somewhat forgotten about it. But it's I think a lot about Buddhism. I don't know if I'm a Buddhist or not, but the whole idea that there's this huge mass of things we have been interdependent with and are part of, and the process of opening to that and memory and acknowledging it, and even on occasion celebrating it.
To get to that last line, just actually really startles. I think the reader must have startled you a bit. Do you remember how that?
I really don't know. I think there's an idea implicit that there's a koan. If you see the Buddha coming down the road, kill him. Yeah, which means you destroy a form before it becomes an impediment to consciousness, rather than becoming attached to the form. So the idea of breaking this face of piety in order to let all of this stuff rush through is maybe where that came from.
But love,
yes, love, and and I see this in the Vietnamese. There's the Vietnamese who were in the war, and no matter what cruelties they inflicted or had inflicted upon them, there's a kind of grace they seem to carry, a spiritual exhaustion and supplication with an open heart that is extraordinary to be around, and it sometimes allows us to open up.
And this is prevalent throughout.
Because of the Vietnam.
The people, it's not just so and so over here. So you find this to be a kind of a general attitude or feeling.
Buddhism and Catholicism exist and interpenetrate each other in Vietnam. And for example, Kuan Yin, the goddess of compassion, morphs very easily with the Virgin Mary,
right,
and the Mother Mary. Yeah, and there's a great deal of focus on compassion. And
to think that the South Vietnam, which was mostly Catholic, and the North, which was mostly Buddhist, were at such horrible odds.
Well, they were actually more intermingled than that. As a matter of fact, the Buddhists became a political problem for both the ARVN, the Republic of South Vietnam, who were our allies, and the North after the war, because the Buddhists are very politically powerful in Vietnam. And the Buddhists actually became quite militant during the war and rioted, and of course Quang Duc burned himself alive, and some other monks did the same thing in protest. And after the war, the Politburo saw fit to not let more than 3 Buddhist leaders meet at one time, because they were aware of the power of the Buddhists to organize. Right. And then Thich Nhat Hanh, of course,
West Vietnamese, yes.
Yeah, I went to his monastery in Hue, where they had a bunch of very young boys, novitiates, and that was powerful to see that at the time.
Which was almost completely destroyed, wasn't it?
Well, Yeah, it's still there's still enough of it there to see, and there's a lot of water around. It's actually very beautiful. And then, of course, Thich Nhat Hanh was forced to leave the country. I think he's able to go back now. Of course, he's quite ill. I don't know if he's doing much traveling.
Yeah. He had a terrible stroke and has survived much longer than people thought he would. Yeah.
So, there's that, and I think that allows that culture to open in a way that ours doesn't really.
Oh, yeah.
And and I'm not going to say that they weren't really formidable fighters, and they weren't on occasion cruel.
Yeah.
But the Vietnamese as a whole are fascinating people, and really very much worth knowing about.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to say about today? About what you see happening and how you're responding to it?
Well, today I'm involved with the things that old people get involved with, and death, and longing, which I find is something that persists and shows up in different forms. It can show up as romantic love. It can show up as spiritual hunger. It can show up as a desire for some kind of completeness or harmoniousness with the world. So I'm preoccupied with that, and love is different for me now. It's not the crazy love of the '60s, but it's still very much there, and so that's a preoccupation of mine. It's something I write about. Jack Gilbert said that most of the romantic poets died young, so they never had a chance to explore what's after the romantic period of one's life, and which is something he got to do, and did so with.
Right. We should just mention that Jack Gilbert was a very well-known poet who lived in the Northampton area for many years, and
was my teacher.
Was your teacher in Northampton? Yeah. Do you have that poem 61 in anywhere near?
Let's see. That's in. Where is that? Is that in this book? Yeah, this is in this book.
Okay, because it's about what you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, that poem is now old.
But you're 62 now, right?
Yeah, right. I'm 75 as of April 10th. 67. Here we go. 61. 50 was poignant. Heavy pear departs the tree, and the poem a sigh between branch and mulch, but no more. Another decade, and I'm all song and scruff, the mind's hot wire threading joint to joint. I'll tell you straight out what I think, no sweetener. Nor has Aphrodite left me collapsed in a stairwell, and don't you father flirt me, girl. This morning the world unbelts her robe, rose-fleshed and randy. I like the rats that skitter under the subway's hot rails, the little black dog who's afraid of no one, not even the dope dealer's pit bull. Montaigne said sickness is God's way of weaning us from life, but I don't think yet. I like the way soul clings to gristle like a newspaper wrapped around a light pole in a storm. Death's a street away, walking parallel and at my pace. He gets a nod.
That's great. Wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah. You've just about finished another new book of poems, right?
I have.
Yeah. That's great. So you're very busy.
I'm very busy. I have actually two books in the works. One of them is the selected cantos that I'm inserting into Dante's Inferno to cover events that happened since Dante's death and persons who've lived since Dante's death.
Wow. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and also you're revising the novel.
I am. It's been sitting in its box for a while, but I'm going to get back to it very shortly.
You've got to revise it. There's a kind of desiderata that you've written here that I'd like you to read, if you don't mind. I don't know
Okay.
if you remember this.
All right. Okay.
Down at the bottom and then on to the second page. I think it's wonderful advice to young poets and to writers and to...
I'd forgotten I'd written this. Where did you find it?
Well, you've probably forgotten you've written a lot of things.
Okay.
But
Here it is.
I
I guess this is...
do you remember this now?
Yeah. Okay. Here goes. Read everything. Travel in at least one other country and actually spend time there in places beyond the tourist circuit. Write every day knowing much of what you write will not succeed, but is necessary to arrive at what does succeed. For example, behind every good poem there are at least 10 failed ones. Have one or two teachers, but at a certain point detach from them and go your own way. Be careful who you show your work to. Understand that the business of writing is understood in a different part of the brain than the actual writing. Learn how to find what is useful in criticism and discard the rest. Keep a commonplace book in which you copy your favorite passages, lines, aphorisms, and bits of dialogue. Copy them carefully and accurately and study how they are put together. Collect rejection slips like counting coup. Understand that marketers know nothing about what makes a book good and that their compilations of data have nothing to do with creativity. Do physical things to keep other parts of your brain open. Keep your senses alive. Live with animals. Learn at least one other language. Write lists of things you love and hate. See, say, Shonagans Pillow Book. Read William Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy. Memorize poems and recite them to feel their music. Love a lot and well.
Wow. You forgot?
I forgot I wrote that, but that's everything I think.
You want to... Okay. Well, we've run out of time. It's gone by so quickly. Yeah. Anything you want to say in closing?
No.
Or read?
No, maybe write one short poem.
Okay. What's this one called?
This is called I Gave My Hands the Day Off.
Okay.
And they couldn't wait to get out of the house. Heard the door slam behind them. Right went to the bookstore. Left to the fair where it became webbed with cotton candy and got its fingers sucked. Right got lost in a volume of Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy and is twitching to write something. So much better for them to be away for the day. How much mischief they would find at home where their owner, heart heavy as a bull's, longs to cup breasts and buttocks or trace the gentle curve of a neck. He sits in his chair and plots outrage, invents a project for each finger, or gives into despair and wants a burning star to crucify each palm.
Thank you for reading that. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.